you check the children.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Fright fans, and welcome to the Horror Show Studios out here in Arizona. I'm Jaime and Fuego, so very stoked as part of Fantasia Fest 2025 to be bringing you this review of one of the films that I've had the chance as a part of virtual press, here for the Horror Show channel, and then also for some stuff on Infuegotainment, my own personal channel, which is when the festival veers into genre that's of the non-spooktacular variety. That's where I've had the chance to check out some other, virtual screenings and stuff like this. And so, yeah, guys, this is a new film. I believe it was making its international debut at this particular festival, being Fantasia and all. And it is entitled Noise. And so this hails out of South Korea, where, J-horror seemed to be like the big thing for a while, and now K-horror has been really, whether it was something like The Wailing from, at least a decent amount of years ago, not to be confused with the one that is a Spanish language that is also screening at Fantasia, but, Exuma, got a whole lot of attention, and rightfully so as well. So it is definitely a contemplative and just slow burn variety of horror that you get with a lot of K-horror, and I do appreciate that, especially because of the fact that while this may have, and we always do overall thoughts, and then we will segue into some story, acting, effects, and so on, but what I do appreciate is that, it's that sort of eerie vibe and mood that, in the midst of a slow burn, though, it can really set itself apart from what may seem like a slightly familiar setup, and the fact that there is a, is there or is there not a spiritual presence in this particular apartment that is in kind of a degrading, complex in Seoul. And so, overall thoughts, though, I dug that ominous vibe, and I also enjoyed the fact that there is, besides the fact that we have a terrific performance from our lead girl who is hearing impaired, and so that adds a very unique dynamic to the proceedings as well, as she is trying to figure out a mystery, not just with her sister, but also with, this building and potential history of things that have transpired there in general. But, I also love the fact that there is kind of a subplot about, from a social standpoint, how, the less fortunate as far as economically are not just taken advantage of by these, like, kind of, dilapidated places where they have to live at times, but also how, and it comes from a character that ends up becoming more nuanced than I was initially expecting, and this is a non-spoiler review, but how there is almost like a looking down on those who even have to be renters in the first place, and so they shouldn't be given as much respect because they do live in a place like this, and so, the more well-off, they should command more respect. And I'm not sure if that is, more of a, regional cultural thing there in, a place like South Korea or whatever, or if that's just, a mentality of this particular character that I mentioned. But yeah, and it does unravel the mystery in a, like, not predictable fashion because of the fact that it does leave some ambiguity, but it also leaves you kind of guessing until the end. Every time I thought I had it, like, completely pegged, I'm like, oh, okay, there's the angry neighbor, but then when the spider web starts to get more and more intricate, and it's like, oh, there's stuff going on in the apartments directly below and directly above this one that is presumably haunted. And so it's, as one character mentions at a particular point, it's like, like there's like grudges and hatred of sorts. I'm speaking verbatim, paraphrasing, but that is spread throughout this entire complex. And so there's a lot of moving pieces in this. I'm not going to say that every single thing like completely cohesively comes together, but for the most part it most definitely does, and that pervasive just feeling of dread that I mentioned and an exceptional performance from our lead, it really goes a long way in this. And so the story goes the fact that we have these two sisters, and they have finally been able to get their own place after a tragedy that left them orphaned, And so the two sisters are really all that one another have. And so the one who is hearing impaired due to the accident, who is our lead lady, she is not completely deaf, but she has to utilize hearing aids to, be able to actually just communicate properly here, as opposed to just reading, lips and things like that, because she does also sign at a couple different points in the film too. But so her sister goes missing, and she ends up joining forces with the boyfriend that she didn't even know that her brother had. And the reason for this is because even though her and her sister got this place, our lead lady had been spending time basically sleeping at the, these, I guess, bunks or whatever, like sleeping quarters that are right next to the factory that she works in. And there's a really great bit with her at the factory early in the film where, everybody else is wearing this crazy ear protection because, it's in this incredibly loud place, and yet she isn't. And so you're wondering immediately, before you really know the nature of this character and her disability, like, how the hell, why is she the only one? And then when she decides to, click it up and on, that's where you can actually hear that this is like a crazy loud and chaotic sort of spot. I'll get more into the use of sound and how just masterfully it's interwoven, and once I get to the technical aspects of the film. But yeah, so she joins forces with the boyfriend that she didn't know her younger sister had, because they have kind of lost connection, and so there is a lot of love there, but there is a definite disconnect. And the disconnect was kind of stemming from, as well as, the fact that her younger sister, our hearing impaired lead lady, had been thinking for the longest time that there was all of this weird noise that was coming from, like the unit above them and so on. And then there's, anger from, I believe it was the guy was on the unit below them, because they're on the 6th floor, if I remember correctly, and, down on the 5th floor. So you've got tyrant neighbor who's like beating on the door and, causing all this ruckus, as our older hearing impaired sister finds out when she goes to investigate stuff, and she starts staying back at that flat apartment, whatever you want to call it, that the two of them were initially living at together. And so, yeah, the mystery as it unravels is one of the stronger things, as I mentioned. Now, it does keep you guessing, though, which I appreciated, about whether the fact that, okay, is there just like so much friction amongst people that live here, and is there just hate and aggravation from the fact that there's these poor living conditions, and the landlord lady, who is like a real beezy until you finally see a different side of her later in the film, which is kind of interesting without getting into too many spoilery sorts of things here and there. But yeah, there's a lot of talk amongst different residents there about how, the living situation here needs to be improved. You find out there is like this huge, almost like garbage sort of area that is in the basement that does factor into trying to figure out some aspects of the mystery of what's going on here, which I did really appreciate. And so, without getting into any later half spoilers as to, has her sister disappeared? Is she dead? Is there a supernatural presence there? Is there not? And I did appreciate the fact that it kept you on your toes and did not give the full reveal one way or the other until some of the dots start getting connected, a lot later into the second and the third act. So it was very well scripted, despite dealing with some of those familiar tropes of, okay, a loved one has disappeared. I'm trying to figure out what happened to them. And I mean, I was just talking when we were doing a filming of another film, when we were shooting a review for something outside of the festival earlier today here at the Horror Show Studios in Arizona. And we were essentially discussing how that is a trope that we see in a lot of different horror movies, but tropes can be elevated from that sort of derivative nature if they truly can bring a unique flavor or slant or whatever, to the proceedings. And first and foremost, a very strong performance from our lead helps a lot. She has great gravitas that she has the chance to, just showcase throughout, especially when she starts really going head to head with, the landlord woman who runs this apartment complex, or, condos or flats or whatever you want to call them as. And so those two have kind of a grudge that's going down, but also when she has some very great dramatic bits when she starts to realize the full extent of the fact that not a lot of the residents really seem to care about this disappearance of her sister. And just the anguish, but also the anger. Like, she really does a great job of selling all of it. And yet there was also like a few sweet moments with her and her sister. There's like a dream bit here or there. There's there you see like kind of a tender, compassionate side as well. You know, she meets this little boy that she kind of has a bit of a friendship with, especially later in the movie as she gets to connect with him a little bit more so. The law enforcement guys who don't really seem like they believe her so much, they were a little less memorable. And, the neighbor, the male neighbor that is, just one floor below the unit that her and her sister have, which seems to be the epicenter of a lot of this, like, emanating evil of sorts. He's a bit over the top for me, but especially with some of his logic, but that's less his performance, I think, and more so just the way that he, the way that he goes about just dealing with it and how he was written. So, so there's that. And then there's also a woman that is a floor or two above, but in the exact same unit, because I'm trying to remember if it's 612 maybe, but, and so 512 below, and then, there's stuff going on in 712, and then, and so on and so forth. That is an actress who, strikes up a friendship with our lead, and, she gets a chance to shine in the third act, really, truly does, without going into, the situation associated with it. But, what really even, dare I say, even beyond performances in this is just the very carefully crafted aspect of filmmaking. The cinematography is great. It does show a lot of elements of this, like when they have to film this huge, like, underground, basement, like, trash place, like, that's, definitely ominous. And there's some very well done shots where we do actually get the occasional bit of gore, because there's not an abundance of gore in this movie. There is, with a lot of South Korean horror that I've watched, an element of restraint, but when it does happen, they typically do really go for it. And this film most definitely does, from that technical side of things, where you see somebody getting brutally bludgeoned, and as you're learning more of the backstory of things that have happened in this building, with certain flashy bits, and then also when certain things are being discovered. So there is, from when we do get the occasion of gore, there is it's well done, and it is alarming, and just really, it sets your heart rate going. But then also, it's the sound for me, man. I mean, the title translated into English is Noise, and it is very much so for the way that they play with sound with our lead character. And not just with our lead character, but just in general, the fact that, tapping and stomping and all these different things are what are setting off so many of these people, within the complex and whatnot. And so, yeah, just that sonic manipulation, the audio manipulation, throughout is the thing that really gives what may seem like kind of a familiar premise and whatnot of everything that's going down. It gives it a very distinctive sort of sophistication. And that was probably, even more so than the great performance, from our lead that I was mentioning. It is the careful craft of the film making within this. And also, just as I'm kind of rounding out thoughts here, guys, and coming to the conclusion here, it is also the fact that beyond being a, horror thriller that is dealing with, death in a complex and disappearances in a complex and things like that, it also did have something to say about, just social disparities and, things of that nature, and how those who are less fortunate that have to live in these more dilapidated conditions do not always command the sympathy, of those who actually have, better things, and, privilege than them. So, guys, that is my thoughts as I wrap things up on the South Korean film that I just want to make sure that I get the name if I forgot to mention it. So this is from director Kim Soo-jin. Kim was also the co-writer of this film. And so, yeah, it is definitely one that I think peeps need to keep their eye out for, whether it eventually it'll eventually make its way to VOD, or maybe a limited theatrical run here in the US. But I could totally see it, on Shudder. I could totally see it on, maybe even a Screambox, or, on one of the more premier scare-based streamers, not to knock Tubi, because there's a lot of good stuff on Tubi, but this is of the more elevated variety. That's not to get all snooty as I'm wearing my hat from Neon here. But, still, guys, yeah, this is this was definitely it was intellectually stimulating as well as being frightening. And so Noise, the South Korean film that I got the chance to check out here at Fantasia Fest, is definitely one of my absolute favorites. So I extend the grande gracias. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find Wa on all social media sectors, Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube on my personal channel in Fuegotainment, where that's where I've been doing previews of the few weeks of the few weekends of Fantasia that we have had thus far. But yeah, you're going to see some reviews popping up as we are nearing the conclusion of the festival. But as I said, the spooky, the ones that are more of the full-on horror variety, since I, am associated with the multiple outlets, the horror stuff here, and then the, the less spooktacular-centric stuff over on Fuegotainment. So, gracias once again. Danke, arigato, merci, thank you. Peace out, everybody. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, Fright fans, remember, stay scared.